At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law called security. "Get this pauper away from the table." She had no idea I owned the company she worked for. The next day, I demoted her to dishwasher. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have known something was wrong the moment I rang the doorbell. Usually, my son Marcus would greet me with that warm smile I remembered from his childhood. Instead, it was Zariah who opened the door, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the handle like she owned the place, which I suppose she believed she did. "Oh, you're here." Her voice carried that particular tone she reserved for me, the one that made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own son's home. I clutched the small gift bag tighter in my hands. Inside was a hand-knitted sweater for my grandson Tommy, something I'd spent weeks working on. "Hello, Zariah. I brought something for Tommy's birthday." She didn't move aside to let me in. Instead, she looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress. The nicest one I owned, though clearly not nice enough for her standards. "Marcus is still getting ready. The other guests are already here." Other guests. I hadn't known there would be other guests. Marcus had simply called last week, his voice strained as it always was when Zariah was nearby, and invited me for a small family dinner for Tommy's 5th birthday. When I finally made it inside, the difference was stark. The living room was filled with well-dressed couples, their jewelry catching the light from the crystal chandelier. They spoke in the hushed, important tones of people who believed their conversations mattered more than others. I recognized a few faces from the society pages of the local newspaper. "Grandma Sherry!" Tommy's voice cut through the adult chatter like sunshine through storm clouds. He ran toward me, his little arms outstretched, and for a moment everything felt right again. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered as I hugged him close. He smelled like birthday cake and childhood innocence. "I made you something special." But before I could give him the gift, Zariah's hand was on his shoulder, pulling him away. "Tommy, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. Why don't you go play with your cousins?" The message was clear. I wasn't clean enough to touch her son. Dinner was worse. The dining room table stretched endlessly, set with china I'd never seen before. Probably wedding gifts from Zariah's side of the family. I was seated at the far end, squeezed between an empty chair and Marcus's college friend, who spent the entire meal talking loudly about his latest business acquisition. Marcus caught my eye once during the appetizer course. He offered a weak smile, but when Zariah whispered something in his ear, he looked away. My heart sank a little deeper. "So, Sherry." Zariah's voice rang out across the table during the main course, causing conversations to pause. "Marcus tells me you're still working at that little cleaning company." The way she said "little" made it sound like something distasteful. Several guests turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "I own a business, yes," I replied quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. Zariah laughed, a sound like ice clinking in a glass. "Oh, how sweet. A business." She turned to the woman beside her. "Sherry does office cleaning. Very humble work." The woman nodded politely, but I caught the subtle shift in her posture, the way she angled herself slightly away from me. It was a movement I'd seen countless times throughout my life. The unconscious recoil people have when they believe they're in the presence of someone beneath their social station. I tried to eat, but each bite felt like sand in my mouth. Around me, the conversation flowed about vacation homes in the Hamptons, private school decisions, and investment portfolios. I had nothing to contribute to these topics, or rather, nothing they would want to hear from someone like me. It was during dessert that everything fell apart. Tommy had escaped from the children's table and climbed onto my lap, chocolate cake smeared on his fingers. "Grandma, will you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself?" It was our tradition, a story I'd made up years ago about a princess who didn't need rescuing because she was clever and strong. But before I could begin, Zariah was standing, her face flushed with anger. "Tommy, get down from there right now." Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll get your clothes dirty. But Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story." I said now. She lifted Tommy from my lap, her movements rough enough to make him whimper. Then she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "I think it's time for you to leave." The dining room fell silent. Even the man who'd been monopolizing conversation about his business deals stopped mid-sentence. I felt 20 pairs of eyes boring into me, witnessing my humiliation. "Soraya, please," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Tommy's birthday." "Security!" she called out loudly, though there was no security present. "Could you please escort this woman out? She's disturbing our family dinner." Marcus stood slowly, his face pale. "Soraya, that's my mother." "Your mother," she said, each word dripping with venom, "doesn't belong at a table with decent people. Look at her, Marcus. She's embarrassing you, embarrassing us, embarrassing our son." I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking to the door. I only remember the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears and the weight of 20 stares following me out. At the door, I turned back once, hoping to catch Marcus's eye, hoping he would say something, do something. He was looking at his plate. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find my car keys. As I fumbled in my purse, I heard the front door close behind me with a definitive click. Sitting in my car, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. 68 years old, silver hair slightly mussed from Tommy's enthusiastic hug, wearing my nicest dress that suddenly felt like rags. I looked exactly like what Soraya had called me, a poor old woman who didn't know her place. But what Soraya didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning, I would walk into the gleaming headquarters of Meridian Technologies, take the elevator to the top floor, and sit behind the mahogany desk in the corner office. The same company where Soraya worked as a marketing manager, believing she was climbing the corporate ladder with her sharp tongue and calculated cruelty. She had no idea that the woman she'd just humiliated was the founder and CEO of the company that signed her paychecks. As I drove home through the quiet streets, my hands finally steady on the steering wheel, I made a decision. Soraya wanted to teach me about knowing my place. Tomorrow, I would teach her about knowing hers. I arrived at Meridian Technologies at 6:30 in the morning, 2 hours before my usual time. The building stood silent in the early dawn light, its glass facade reflecting the pale sky like a mirror. I'd built this company from nothing 35 years ago, back when people laughed at the idea of a woman starting a tech business. Now, it employed over 2,000 people across 3 states. The security guard, Miguel, looked surprised to see me so early. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison. You're here bright and early today." "Couldn't sleep," I told him, which was the truth. I'd spent most of the night replaying every moment from dinner, every cruel word, every pitying glance from the other guests. My office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but this morning I barely glanced at it. Instead, I went straight to my computer and pulled up the employee database. Soraya Mitchell Morrison, Marketing Manager, Digital Campaigns Division, hired 18 months ago. I stared at her employee photo, that same condescending smile she'd worn last night when she called me a poor old woman. According to her file, she'd impressed the hiring manager with her dynamic personality and innovative approaches to client engagement. Her salary was more than most people made in 2 years. I clicked deeper into her records, performance reviews, project assignments, colleague feedback forms. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 formal complaints filed against her in the past year, all from older employees. Margaret Chen, 61, from accounting, complained that Soraya had publicly humiliated her during a budget meeting, calling her methods outdated and suggesting she step aside for someone who understands modern business. The complaint was dismissed after Soraya claimed she was simply advocating for efficiency. Robert Williams, 58, from IT support, reported that Soraya had demanded he work overtime on her personal projects while berating him about his slow processing speed and inability to keep up with younger minds. Again, dismissed after Soraya's supervisor vouched for her high standards. The third complaint came from Janet Rodriguez, 63, a custodial supervisor. Soraya had apparently complained to HR that Janet was unprofessional and couldn't understand basic instructions After Janet didn't immediately move a meeting room cleaning to accommodate Zariah's last-minute schedule change, Janet had been transferred to the night shift. I leaned back in my chair, a cold anger settling in my chest. This wasn't just about how she'd treated me. This was a pattern. Zariah targeted older employees, used her position to demean them, and relied on the company's reluctance to deal with workplace conflicts to escape consequences. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Mom?" His voice was strained, exhausted. "I'm sorry about last night." Zariah was. She was stressed about the dinner party. She didn't mean what she said. I closed my eyes. Even now, he was making excuses for her. "She called security to have me removed from my grandson's birthday dinner, Marcus." "There was no security, Mom. She was just emotional. She humiliated me in front of 20 people." A long pause. "I know. I should have said something. I'm sorry." His voice cracked slightly. "But you know how she gets when she's planning these events. Everything has to be perfect. Perfect. As if my presence somehow tainted their perfect life. "I need some time to think," I told him. "Of course. But Mom, maybe next time, if you could dress up a little more. You know how important appearances are to Zariah's friends." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My son, my gentle, kind son who used to defend injured birds and give his lunch money to classmates who forgot theirs, was asking me to change who I was to accommodate his wife's cruelty. By 8 o'clock, the office was bustling with activity. I watched through my window as employees filed into the building, riding elevators to their respective floors, settling into their workdays. Somewhere among them was Zariah, probably complaining to colleagues about her difficult mother-in-law who didn't know her place. I buzzed my assistant, Helen. She'd been with me for 15 years, starting as a secretary and working her way up to executive assistant. She was also 62 years old, exactly the kind of employee Zariah seemed to enjoy targeting. "Helen, I need you to pull some personnel files for me." Quietly. "Of course. Which employees?" "Start with the digital campaigns division. I want to see everything. Performance reviews, project reports, internal communications, and Helen, I especially want to see any records involving interactions with older staff members." Helen paused. She'd worked with me long enough to recognize when something was brewing. "Should I ask what this is about?" "Not yet. But I have a feeling we're going to be making some changes around here." An hour later, Helen returned with a stack of files that confirmed my worst fears. Zariah's division had the highest turnover rate in the company, specifically among employees over 50. Exit interviews revealed a pattern of complaints about ageist attitudes and hostile work environment. But somehow these never made it to my desk. I found records of Zariah's emails, printed out and filed according to company policy. One exchange with a colleague made my hands shake with anger. "Can you believe they're making me work with Janet on the Morrison project? The woman can barely operate a smartphone. Why do we keep these dinosaurs around? They're just taking up space that could go to people who actually understand the modern workplace." The Morrison project. A campaign for a new client that Zariah had claimed credit for, earning herself a substantial bonus. Janet Rodriguez, the 63-year-old custodial supervisor who'd been transferred to nights, had developed the initial concept during a brainstorming session that included support staff. I picked up my phone and dialed extension 4247. "Human Resources. Jennifer speaking." "Jennifer, this is Sherry Morrison. I need to see you in my office immediately, and bring the organizational chart for the digital campaigns division." 20 minutes later, Jennifer sat across from my desk, her face pale as I outlined what I'd discovered. "Mrs. Morrison, I had no idea the situation was this extensive. Some of these complaints should have been escalated to your office immediately." "They should have been," I agreed, "but they weren't, which tells me we have more problems than just one employee. However, right now I want to focus on Zariah Mitchell Morrison." Jennifer nodded nervously. "What would you like me to do?" I leaned forward, my decision crystallizing. "I want her transferred immediately, today." "To which department?" I thought about Janet Rodriguez, working the night shift because Zariah found her inconvenient. I thought about Margaret Chen, publicly humiliated for using methods that had worked successfully for decades. I thought about Robert Williams, forced to work overtime on personal projects while being called slow and outdated. Food services, dishwashing. Jennifer's eyes widened. Mrs. Morrison, that's quite a significant demotion. She'll certainly file a grievance. Let her. Tell her it's part of a new company initiative to have management personnel understand all aspects of our operation. Tell her it's temporary, pending restructuring of her division. And if she refuses? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then she can find employment elsewhere. I'm sure there are plenty of companies that would appreciate her. Dynamic personality. After Jennifer left, I stood at my window, looking down at the street 42 floors below. People moved like ants, each focused on their own small piece of the world, unaware of the larger forces shaping their days. Tomorrow, Zariah would report to the basement cafeteria. She would put on a hairnet and wash dishes in industrial sinks, working alongside the people she'd dismissed as dinosaurs and obstacles. She would learn what it felt like to be looked down upon, to have her value questioned, to be treated as if she didn't matter. And she would do it all without knowing that the woman she'd humiliated last night was the one holding her future in her hands. I picked up my phone to call the cafeteria manager. There was work to be done. The cafeteria in the basement of Meridian Technologies hummed with the constant noise of industrial dishwashers and food preparation. Steam rose from massive sinks where dishes were scrubbed and sanitized before being loaded into commercial washers. It was honest work, the kind that kept a company running, but invisible to most of the people who benefited from it. I stood in the service corridor, wearing a maintenance uniform I'd borrowed from the facilities department. At 68, I could easily pass for one of the older cleaning staff members. My silver hair was tucked under a baseball cap, and I carried a clipboard to complete the disguise. Zariah had been here for 3 days. Through the kitchen service window, I watched her struggle with the industrial spray nozzle, her designer manicure already chipped and ruined. She wore the standard-issue hairnet and plastic apron, but her face bore an expression of barely contained rage that made several of her coworkers give her a wide berth. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she muttered to Maria, the woman working beside her. "I have a master's degree in marketing. I was managing a 7-figure campaign portfolio. Now they have me washing dishes like some common what?" Maria interrupted, her voice sharp. She was about 55, with calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "You think this work makes us less than you?" Zariah's face flushed. "That's not what I meant. I just meant that I'm qualified for something better." "We're all qualified for something, honey," said Janet Rodriguez, who was preparing vegetables at the next station. I recognized her from the files, the woman Zariah had complained about, who'd been transferred to the night shift. Janet didn't know that her tormentor was now standing just a few feet away. But there's dignity in any honest work. Zariah rolled her eyes when Janet wasn't looking. Easy for her to say. She's probably been doing this her whole life. I felt my jaw clench. Even here, even reduced to washing dishes herself, Zariah couldn't resist looking down on others. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, Zariah's going through a rough patch at work. Some restructuring thing. She's really stressed. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? Just the 3 of us?" I typed back, "I'll think about it." But I already knew my answer. Watching Zariah these past 3 days had shown me that her cruelty wasn't just reserved for family dinners. It was who she was, woven into the fabric of her character. On the 4th day, I decided to get closer. I entered the kitchen during the lunch rush, when the noise and chaos would provide perfect cover. I approached the dish pit where Zariah was working, now looking thoroughly defeated. Her blonde hair hung limp beneath the hairnet, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Excuse me?" I said, deliberately roughening my voice and adding a slight accent. "I need to clean the floor around your station." Zariah barely glanced at me. "Whatever, just don't get in my way." I began mopping around her feet, positioning myself close enough to hear her conversation with Luis, a young man who'd been trying to help her adjust to the work. "I don't understand why they're making me do this," Zariah complained, scraping food remnants off a plate with unnecessary force. It's probably that dried-up old bitch from HR. She never liked me. Luis shook his head. Jennifer's actually pretty fair. Maybe it really is just temporary like they said. Temporary my ass, Zariah snapped. This is punishment for something. I just can't figure out what. She gestured around the kitchen with a soapy hand. Look at this place. Look at these people. I don't belong here. Hey, Luis said quietly. These people work hard. They're good people. Zariah let out a bitter laugh. Good people? Luis, wake up. These are the people who couldn't make it anywhere else. They're here because they don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better. I stopped mopping, my grip tightening on the handle. Around us, the kitchen continued its rhythmic chaos, but I felt like I was standing in a bubble of silence, processing what I'd just heard. That lady over there, Zariah continued, nodding toward Janet, probably never even finished high school. And that woman with the accent who was here earlier, probably illegal. They should be grateful for any work they can get. Luis looked uncomfortable. Zariah, that's not what? Not true? Zariah's voice rose slightly. Look, I know it sounds harsh, but some people are meant to lead, and some people are meant to follow. Some people are meant to create value, and some people are just maintenance. Just maintenance. As if the people who kept the company running, who ensured that employees like her former self could focus on their important work, were somehow less human. I resumed mopping, moving methodically around the kitchen, listening to Zariah continue her commentary on her co-workers. She criticized Maria's English, called Luis naive for defending the older workers, and made snide remarks about Janet's appearance. The worst part, she said as she rinsed a stack of plates, is that my mother-in-law probably loves this. She's probably sitting in her little apartment, laughing about how her successful daughter-in-law got knocked down a peg. My blood ran cold. Even here, even while suffering the consequences of her own actions, she was thinking about how to blame others. Your mother-in-law? Luis asked. Oh, she's this pathetic old woman who thinks the world owes her something just because she's old. She showed up to my son's birthday party dressed like she was going to a garage sale, embarrassed my husband in front of all our friends. I had to ask her to leave. The way she told it, she was the victim, the wronged party. There was no mention of calling security, no acknowledgement of the humiliation she'd inflicted. In Zariah's version of events, she was simply a woman protecting her family from an embarrassing relative. She sounds difficult, Luis said diplomatically. She's a bitter old woman who's jealous of what we've built, Zariah replied. She's spent her whole life doing manual labor, and she can't stand that her son married someone with class, someone with education. She wants to drag us down to her level. Manual labor, like what she was doing right now, like what the people around her did every day with dignity and pride. I finished mopping and began to leave, but Zariah's voice stopped me one more time. You know what the really sick part is? My husband actually feels sorry for her. He thinks I should apologize for protecting our family from embarrassment. Can you believe that? As I walked away, I heard Luis say quietly, maybe you should talk to her. Family's important. Zariah's laugh was sharp and cold. Family? Real family doesn't show up looking like they just crawled out of a trailer park. Real family understands social boundaries. I made it to the service corridor before my hands started shaking. I leaned against the wall, removing the baseball cap and running my fingers through my silver hair. 3 days of washing dishes, of seeing how the other half lived, of working alongside people she'd previously dismissed, and she'd learned nothing. If anything, she doubled down on her prejudices. That evening, Marcus called again. Mom, I'm worried about Zariah. This job situation is really getting to her. She comes home exhausted and angry every day. What does she say about it? I asked, already knowing the answer. She thinks someone at her company is targeting her. She's convinced it's some kind of discrimination, maybe because she's young and successful. He paused. She asked me to call you, actually. She wants to apologize for the other night. I almost laughed. Zariah wanted to apologize, not because she felt genuine remorse, but because she needed allies. She was looking for someone to blame for her situation, and she'd realized that burning bridges with family might not be strategic. Tell her I'm not ready for that conversation yet, I said. Mom, please. She's really struggling. Marcus, I said gently, has Zariah told you what her new job involves? Some kind of cross-training program, learning different aspects of the business. Cross-training, not washing dishes, not working alongside the people she'd spent months belittling. Even to her own husband, she couldn't admit the truth of her situation. I see, I said. Well, I'm sure she's learning a lot. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about the woman I'd observed for 3 days. Tomorrow, I would reveal myself. Tomorrow, Zariah would learn that the pathetic old woman she'd humiliated held her future in her hands. But first, I wanted to see how she would react when she realized that everything she thought she knew about power and position had just turned upside down. I arrived at the office earlier than usual on Friday morning. My decision crystallized during a sleepless night. Watching Zariah for nearly a week had confirmed what I'd suspected. She wasn't learning empathy from her experience in the kitchen. She was learning resentment. Helen looked up as I entered, noting the determined set of my shoulders. What can I do for you today, Mrs. Morrison? I need you to arrange a meeting. Zariah Mitchell Morrison, my office, 10 o'clock. I paused at my door. And Helen? Make sure she comes up in the main elevator. I want her to walk through the executive floor. At exactly 10 o'clock, Helen's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Morrison, your 10 o'clock is here. Send her in. I turned my chair to face the window, my back to the door, as I heard footsteps on the marble floor. Zariah's reflection appeared in the glass. She looked tired, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced with the casual attire appropriate for kitchen work. Excuse me. Her voice carried that familiar tone of barely controlled irritation. I was told someone wanted to see me about my transfer. I don't know why they sent me to the executive floor. There's obviously been some mistake. I swiveled my chair around slowly, letting the recognition dawn in her eyes. The change in her expression was remarkable. Confusion melting into shock, shock crystallizing into horror. Hello, Zariah. Her mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. You! What are you? How did you get in here? I walked in through my private entrance, just like I do every morning. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss. She remained standing, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Disbelief, anger, fear, and something that might have been calculation. This is some kind of joke. You're not. You can't be. The CEO and founder of Meridian Technologies? I completed her thought. I'm afraid I am. Have been for 35 years, in fact. Zariah sank into the chair as if her legs had given out. But you. At dinner you said you worked for a cleaning company. I said I owned a business. You assumed it was a cleaning company. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. People often see what they expect to see, don't they? She was quiet for a long moment, her mind clearly racing. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer, with a hint of the charm she'd used to climb the corporate ladder. Mrs. Morrison, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, you would have treated me differently, I interrupted. That's interesting. So your behavior toward me was based on your perception of my social status? Her face flushed. That's not what I meant. What did you mean exactly? She straightened in her chair, apparently deciding to try a different approach. I meant that there was obviously a misunderstanding. Family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes people say things in the heat of the moment that they don't really mean. Ah, so when you called security to remove me from my grandson's birthday party, that was just a heated moment? I was stressed about the dinner party. Everything had to be perfect, and my presence made it imperfect. I pulled up her employee file on my computer screen. Tell me, Zariah, do you remember Margaret Chen? The sudden change of topic caught her off guard. Who? Margaret Chen, 61 years old, accounting department. You publicly humiliated her during a budget meeting, suggested she step aside for someone who understands modern business. Zariah's eyes darted around the office, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. That was a professional disagreement. Sometimes you have to be direct in business. What about Robert Williams? IT support? You made him work overtime on your personal projects while telling him he couldn't keep up with younger minds. I have high standards. And Janet Rodriguez? You complained that she was unprofessional because she couldn't immediately accommodate your last-minute schedule changes. She was transferred to the night shift because of your complaint. Zariah's carefully constructed composure began to crack. I don't understand what this has to do with anything. Those were legitimate workplace issues. I turned my computer screen toward her, showing her the list of complaints filed against her. 3 formal complaints about age discrimination in 18 months, all dismissed because your supervisor believed you were simply maintaining high standards. Because I was. Were you maintaining high standards when you told Luis that the people in the kitchen are there because they don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better? The color drained from her face. You were. That was you in the kitchen? Every day this week, listening to you dismiss hardworking people as maintenance. Watching you learn nothing from your experience except how to blame others for your situation. She stood up abruptly, her mask finally slipping completely. This is entrapment. You can't spy on employees. I can observe the workplace culture of my own company. What I found was an employee who systematically targets older workers, who believes social status determines human worth, and who lacks the basic empathy required for leadership. You're doing this because of the dinner. The accusation burst out of her. This is personal revenge. I stood as well, moving to the window that overlooked the city. Do you know what I built this company on, Zariah? The idea that innovation comes from respecting every perspective, that wisdom has many forms, and that a person's value isn't determined by their age or background. I turned back to face her. You represent everything I've spent my career fighting against. So what happens now? Her voice was barely a whisper. Are you going to fire me? That depends on you. Hope flickered in her eyes. What do you mean? You have a choice. You can continue working in the kitchen, learning what it means to be treated the way you've treated others. Maybe eventually you'll develop some understanding of how your actions affect people. And the other option? You can resign. Today. I'll provide a neutral reference that mentions your marketing skills without detailing the reasons for your departure. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she spoke, and her words revealed everything I needed to know about her character. This is blackmail. You're using your position to force me out because I didn't know who you were. I'm giving you an opportunity to leave with your dignity intact. My dignity? Her voice rose. You had me washing dishes for a week. You humiliated me. I gave you the same treatment you've given to employees under your supervision. The difference is, they had no choice. You do. Zariah moved toward the door, then turned back. Her face twisted with anger. Marcus will hear about this. He'll know what kind of person his mother really is. Marcus will hear the truth. Yes. He'll learn that his wife has been systematically bullying older employees and that she called security to remove his mother from his son's birthday party. She froze with her hand on the door handle. He'll also learn, I continued, that when given the opportunity to take responsibility for her actions and grow as a person, she chose to blame others and play the victim. You're destroying my marriage. Your marriage is not my responsibility, Zariah. Your character is. She stood there for another moment, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and calculated. I choose the kitchen. I'll stay in the kitchen. And I'll prove that this is all about your petty revenge. Marcus will see through this eventually. I nodded slowly. Very well. Report to the cafeteria Monday morning. Same time, same station. After she left, I sat back down at my desk, feeling older than my 68 years. I'd hoped that revealing the truth would shock her into self-reflection, that she might choose to use this as an opportunity for growth. Instead, she'd chosen defiance and delusion. She would return to the kitchen not to learn, but to endure. She would paint herself as the victim of a vindictive old woman, never acknowledging that her current situation was the direct result of her own cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can we have lunch today? Zariah has something she wants to tell you. I looked at the message for a long time before responding. I'm afraid I'm quite busy today. Perhaps another time. Because I already knew what Zariah wanted to tell me. She wanted to confess her identity, to leverage our family connection to escape the consequences of her actions. She wanted to turn Marcus against me by painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable expectations. But that conversation would come on my terms, not hers. And when it did, Marcus would learn some uncomfortable truths about the woman he'd married and the mother he'd failed to defend. The reckoning was far from over. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after my confrontation with Zariah. Marcus's voice was strained, carrying the weight of someone who'd finally been forced to see an uncomfortable truth. "Mom, we need to talk. All three of us." I set down my teacup, noting the tremor in his voice. "About what, specifically?" "About Zariah's job situation. About what happened at Tommy's birthday. About everything." He paused, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. Zariah coaching him, no doubt. "She told me who you really are. And how do you feel about that?" A long silence, confused, angry. "I don't understand why you didn't tell me you owned the company where she works. You never asked what kind of business I owned, Marcus. You assumed, just like she did. That's not the point, Mom. The point is that you've been manipulating her employment, punishing her because of personal family issues." I closed my eyes. Even now, even knowing the truth, he was defending her. "Is that what she told you?" "She told me you've been making her wash dishes for weeks as some kind of revenge. That's not the mother I know." "Then perhaps you don't know me as well as you think. Just like you don't know your wife as well as you think." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we should have this conversation in person. Tonight. My apartment, 8 o'clock. They arrived 15 minutes late. Zariah had clearly spent time preparing. Her hair was styled, her makeup perfect, her clothing carefully chosen to project an image of professional competence, undermined by personal persecution. Marcus looked tired, caught between two women he was supposed to love but clearly didn't understand. I served coffee in my small living room, the same modest space where I'd lived for the past 10 years. The contrast between this apartment and their sprawling suburban home wasn't lost on any of us. "Mom," Marcus began, settling onto my worn sofa. "Zariah has told me some disturbing things about what's been happening at her work." "I'm sure she has." I remained standing, my hands clasped behind my back. "What exactly did she tell you?" Zariah leaned forward, her expression a careful blend of hurt and determination. "I told him that you've been using your position to humiliate me. That you transferred me to the worst job in the company as punishment for a family disagreement." "A family disagreement." I repeated the phrase slowly. "Is that what you're calling it?" "Mom," Marcus interrupted, "regardless of what happened at Tommy's birthday, using your business to settle personal scores isn't right. It's not like you. You're right. It's not like the mother you know, but it's exactly like the CEO I've always been." I moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Tell me, Marcus, what do you know about Zariah's performance at work?" "She's successful. She's ambitious. She's building a career. She's filed 3 complaints against older employees in 18 months. She's created a hostile work environment for anyone over 50. She's systematically bullied people she considers beneath her." Zariah's careful composure cracked slightly. "Those were legitimate professional concerns. You told Luis that the kitchen workers don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better. You called them maintenance." I turned back to face them. "You said Janet Rodriguez probably never finished high school and suggested Maria might be illegal." Marcus's face went pale. "Zariah, is that true?" I was frustrated. People say things when they're under stress. "The same way you say things when you're stressed about dinner parties?" I asked quietly. "The same way you called security to remove the pobretona from your table." "What does that mean?" Marcus looked between us, confused. "It means poor little woman in Spanish," I explained. "It's what your wife called me before having me escorted out of your son's birthday party." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at Zariah, his face cycling through emotions I recognized from his childhood. The same look he'd worn when he was 7 and realized that Santa Claus wasn't real. "You called my mother a poor little woman?" Zariah's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "Marcus, you have to understand, She showed up looking like, I didn't know who she was. So that makes it acceptable? No, but what? His voice was rising now, the careful control he'd maintained for years finally cracking. But it's okay to humiliate people if you think they're poor. But it's okay to throw my mother out of our house if she doesn't meet your standards? Marcus, please, you're not understanding. I'm understanding perfectly. He stood up, pacing to the far end of my small living room. I'm understanding that my wife threw my mother out of our house because she was embarrassed by her appearance. I'm understanding that she's been bullying older employees at work. I'm understanding that when Mom gave her consequences for her behavior, she ran home to paint herself as the victim. Zariah's mask finally slipped completely. Your mother has been lying to you. She's been manipulating this entire situation to make me look bad. How? The question came out sharp as a blade. How has she been lying? She pretended to be a cleaning lady. She spied on me. In her own company, observing an employee who'd been the subject of multiple complaints. Marcus turned to me. Is that true, Mom? About the complaints? I nodded. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, all dismissed because her supervisor believed she was simply maintaining high standards. Marcus looked back at his wife, and I could see the last of his illusions crumbling. So, when you came home every night complaining about how unfairly you were being treated, about how someone was targeting you, you were actually facing consequences for your own behavior. Marcus, you don't understand what it's like in that corporate world. Sometimes you have to be tough. Tough? His voice broke. You called my mother security, Zariah. You humiliated her in front of 20 people. You made our son watch his grandmother get thrown out of his birthday party. I was protecting our family's reputation. From what? From my mother? From the woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who never missed a parent-teacher conference or a baseball game? He was shouting now, years of suppressed resentment pouring out. You were protecting us from the most decent person I know? Zariah stood up, her face flushed with anger and desperation. She's not the saint you think she is. Look where she lives. Look how she dresses. She's an embarrassment. The slap of her words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was eerily calm. Get out. What? Get out of my mother's apartment. Get out now, before I say something I'll regret. Marcus, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He moved toward the door, holding it open. Go home. Pack your things. We'll talk about custody arrangements through lawyers. Zariah looked at me, her eyes wild with panic. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted to destroy my marriage. I met her gaze steadily. I wanted you to learn that actions have consequences. I wanted you to understand that treating people with cruelty because you think they're beneath you is unacceptable. I wanted you to develop some basic human decency. And instead, you've destroyed everything. No, Zariah, you destroyed everything. The moment you decided that my grandson was better off without his grandmother, the moment you chose cruelty over kindness, the moment you made Marcus choose between his wife and his conscience. She looked between Marcus and me one final time, searching for something that would save her. Finding nothing, she grabbed her purse and stalked toward the door. This isn't over, she hissed. Yes, I said quietly. It is. After she left, Marcus collapsed into the chair she'd vacated, his head in his hands. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of 20 years of mistakes settling between us. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. How long have you known about who she really is? I suspected from the beginning, but I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that maybe she would change, that maybe love would make her kinder. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. What happens now? Now you rebuild. You focus on being the father Tommy needs. You remember who you are underneath all the compromises you made. And Zariah? I thought about her options. Resignation or continued humiliation in the kitchen of my company. Zariah will figure out her own path. She always has. Marcus nodded slowly. Can you forgive me for letting her treat you that way? I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his hand in mine. You're my son. There's nothing to forgive. but even as I said the words, I knew that rebuilding trust would take time. Some wounds heal quickly, others leave scars that change you forever. The reckoning had arrived, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, I sat in my office on a crisp autumn morning, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed Meridian Technologies' continued growth. The morning light streamed through my windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where I'd made so many decisions over the years. Helen knocked and entered with my coffee and the morning mail. "Mrs. Morrison, there's a resignation letter on your desk from the Food Services Department," I knew before I opened it. Zoraya's elegant handwriting filled a single page, a formal resignation effective immediately, citing personal reasons and pursuit of new opportunities. No acknowledgement of what she'd learned, no expression of remorse, no growth. Simply an exit strategy that would allow her to preserve whatever remained of her dignity. I signed the acceptance form without hesitation. Some people learn from consequences, others simply endure them until they find an escape route. "Helen, please process this today and send a memo to HR. I want exit interviews to be mandatory for all supervisory positions going forward. No exceptions." The changes I'd implemented over the past 6 months went far beyond one toxic employee. I'd restructured the reporting system so that complaints about workplace bullying came directly to my attention. I'd instituted sensitivity training for all management personnel. Most importantly, I'd promoted Janet Rodriguez to floor supervisor, a position where her wisdom and experience were finally valued. Margaret Chen had returned to day shift with a commendation letter in her file. Robert Williams was now leading a project to upgrade our IT infrastructure, his decades of experience proving invaluable. The culture was changing, slowly but steadily. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom. Are you free for lunch today? Tommy wants to show you something." The relationship with my son had healed gradually, like a bone that had been broken and needed time to grow strong again. The divorce had been swift. Zoraya had moved back to her parents' house in another state, apparently deciding that starting over somewhere else was preferable to facing the consequences of her actions in a town where people knew the truth. Of course, the usual place? "Actually, Tommy wants to have a picnic in the park. He's been practicing something for you." An hour later, I spread a blanket under an oak tree while Tommy raced around the playground, his laughter echoing across the grass. Marcus looked healthier than he had in years, the constant tension finally gone from his shoulders. "Mom, watch this," Tommy called out, hanging upside down from the monkey bars with the fearless confidence that only 5-year-olds possess. "Be careful, sweetheart," I called back, my heart swelling with the simple joy of being allowed to worry about him again. Marcus settled beside me on the blanket, unpacking sandwiches from a paper bag. "He asks about you every day. When is Grandma coming over? Can Grandma teach me to bake cookies? Can Grandma tell me the princess story?" "And what do you tell him?" "That Grandma is busy building castles and slaying dragons." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "He's decided you're the most powerful person he knows." I laughed, watching Tommy navigate the playground equipment with determination. Smart boy. Too smart sometimes. Last week he asked why Mommy moved away. I didn't know what to tell him. This was the hardest part, protecting a child's innocence while maintaining honesty. "What did you say?" I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes mean they have to live in different places for a while. Marcus pulled out juice boxes, his movements careful and deliberate. He asked if she was coming back, and I told him I didn't know. Is that terrible? Should I have been more definitive? I reached over and squeezed his hand. You told him the truth in a way he could understand. That's all any parent can do. Tommy ran over, breathless and glowing with excitement. "Grandma, come see the castle I built in the sandbox." I let him pull me toward his creation, an elaborate structure of sand and sticks that would have made any architect proud. As I admired his work, I noticed other families around us, grandparents pushing swings, parents chasing toddlers, the beautiful chaos of ordinary life. This was what I'd been fighting for, not revenge, not vindication, but the right to be part of my grandson's world, the right to exist without apology, to be valued for who I was rather than dismissed for who I wasn't. That evening, as Marcus and Tommy drove away, I stood in my small apartment looking at the photos that covered my walls. Pictures of Tommy at various ages, Marcus graduating from college, holiday celebrations from before Zariah entered our lives. But there were new photos now too, recent ones of Tommy and me baking cookies, building blanket forts, reading stories, a life reclaimed. My phone buzzed with a text from Luis, the young man from the kitchen who'd become an unexpected friend. Mrs. Morrison, wanted to let you know that Maria's grandson graduated high school today. First in his family to finish. She wanted to thank you for the scholarship program you started. I smiled, typing back, give her my congratulations. Hard work deserves recognition. The scholarship program had been my latest initiative, funding education for the children and grandchildren of longtime employees. People like Maria, who'd spent 20 years ensuring that Meridian Technologies ran smoothly, deserved to see their families thrive. Another text arrived, this one from Janet Rodriguez. Night shift supervisor position opened up in Building B. Interested in applying. Could use a reference from someone who knows my work ethic. I laughed out loud, typing back. I might know someone who could help with that. As the sun set over the city, I made myself a simple dinner and settled onto my couch with a book. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of isolation. It was the comfortable quiet of peace. I thought about Zariah, wherever she was now, and felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction in her downfall, but sadness for the opportunities she'd wasted. She could have learned from her experience in the kitchen. She could have developed empathy, grown as a person, rebuilt her relationship with Marcus on a foundation of mutual respect rather than social climbing. Instead, she'd chosen to see herself as a victim, to blame others for consequences she'd brought upon herself. Some people spend their entire lives running from accountability, never realizing that the freedom they seek can only come from taking responsibility for their choices. My phone rang one final time. Marcus again. Mom, Tommy wanted me to call and tell you good night. He's worried you might be lonely. I heard my grandson's voice in the background. Tell Grandma that dragons are scared of the dark, so she should leave the lights on. Tell him I'll leave the lights on, I said, smiling. And Marcus, thank you. For what? For choosing to see the truth when it mattered. After we hung up, I did indeed leave a small light on in the kitchen. Not because I was afraid of dragons, but because Tommy worried about me, and being worried about was a privilege I'd almost lost. I settled into bed that night thinking about power, not the kind that comes from corporate titles or social status, but the kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less, the kind that allows you to stand up for yourself and others, even when it's difficult, the kind that comes from choosing dignity over convenience, truth over comfort. Zariah had thought she understood power. She'd believed it came from putting others down, from climbing social ladders, from marrying into a family she considered beneath her true aspirations. She'd mistaken cruelty for strength, manipulation for intelligence. But real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds rather than destroys, comes from lifting others up. It comes from using your position to protect those who can't protect themselves. It comes from understanding that every person has value, regardless of their age, their accent, their education, or their job title. I'd built Meridian Technologies on those principles 35 years ago, and I'd defend them for as long as I drew breath. The next morning, I would wake up and return to my office, where I would continue the work of building a company culture based on respect and dignity. I would review applications for the scholarship program, approve promotions for deserving employees, and ensure that the mistakes of the past couldn't be repeated. But tonight, I simply slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had fought for what mattered and won. Not through revenge or retaliation, but through the quiet, persistent application of consequences and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human decency. I had reclaimed my place in my family and my company. I had protected others from the kind of treatment I'd endured. And most importantly, I had shown my grandson that his grandmother was indeed powerful, not because she could hurt people, but because she chose to help them. That was the kind of power worth having, the kind that built legacies instead of tearing them down, the kind that created light instead of darkness, the kind that let you sleep peacefully, knowing you'd done the right thing. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.